Mr. Buckles, I see that we have some attendees who have joined us. So if you would like to start now, if you want to wait a few minutes, we can. Thank you to those who have joined us this evening. We'll begin in just a moment.
I say we need to respect people's time and get started.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Buckles, I'm going to remove the opening slide and you'll be on camera and we'll be going live now.
Okay, thank you. Are we ready?
We are, sir.
So I guess we need the first slide on the presentation. Good evening, everyone. This evening, we would like to give you an update on a couple of projects that we're going to be undertaking at the Hightower landfill to improve the environmental compliance of the landfill and to help prevent any contaminants from leaving the landfill property. So that's the purpose of our meeting, and we will have an opportunity for you to ask questions later. Next slide, please. The history and location of the landfill, as you know, this closed Hightower landfill is located in the extreme northwest corner of Forsyth County off of Old Federal Road. It's a closed municipal solid waste landfill. There's also a C&D section within that closed landfill. The site was closed in 1999. Groundwater monitoring began in 1994 and continues to this day, and we will have to continue doing the groundwater monitoring until at least the year 2029. That we have a corrective action plan and a methane remediation plan that have been approved by EPD. The methane remediation plan involves the methane well MM11, which I'll show you a slide here in a moment that shows you the location of that. We've had some methane readings that were above the concentration limit, above the standard. So we're addressing that with one of these projects. The other project is the groundwater corrective action plan. Currently, we have a corrective action plan which has been approved by the Georgia EPD, which involves monitored natural attenuation, which simply put means you monitor for chemical constituents that would be likely to be present in the groundwater as a result of waste that's been placed within a closed landfill. You monitor for those components. All of those constituents have to be below what we call the groundwater protection standards. None of that can leave the permitted property boundary. So monitored natural attenuation is simply monitoring a network of groundwater wells which are close to the perimeter of the landfill, and all of those wells are checked for any constituents that could be present from the landfill, and so all of those have to be within standards. It also requires that any concentrations that are above the protection standards have to be contained within the permitted boundaries of the landfill. Next slide, please. The issue we have with the methane, this schematic shows the location of well MM11, which is near the northern property boundary of the landfill. It's adjacent to the phase 2 and 3 section of the landfill, municipal solid waste sections. What we're planning to do with this, as you see, the MM11 well, as we've indicated, is above the standards, and the dashed lines here do indicate the phases of the landfill. Next slide, please. To address this concentration of methane that's above the standards for well MM11, we're planning to relocate that well. We're actually going to drill a new well, which is closer to the northern property boundary, that well being MM11R. That well will give us a very good reading of exactly what the concentration is at the property boundary, at the compliance point, along with relocating this well to give us a better reading of what the methane really is near the property boundary. We're going to be installing some upgrades to this methane vent trench number 1, which is this dotted line adjacent to phase 2. You'll see it on this diagram here with the red dotted line that says phase 2-MV05. As part of that upgrade, we're going to be installing a solar powered vacuum vent and flare on this vent trench number 1. These active vents and flares are exactly the same as what has been used in other locations on the landfill. As you can see on this diagram, on this phase 2 and 3 area, we have MVO 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are currently in existence. They've been there for quite a number of years. These are very effective methods to remove methane gas from the landfill. We're planning to complete this before the end of December of this year. The next slide, please. This is a photograph of one of the methane flare systems with the solar panels. This one is vent number 4 on that previous diagram that we were just showing you. This is located just up the hill from where the new flare will be located, but it'll be identical to this. These systems are proven technology. They work really well for removing landfill gas from the landfill. Active flaring of this vent trench number 1 will remove more landfill gas than can be accomplished just with passive venting, and therefore will help prevent migration of methane gas off property. We could also receive some additional benefits from this, that methane gas and landfill gas can interact with water that's eventually will become groundwater when you have rainwater and such that can travel. The landfill is capped, but you still get a little bit of water that can go through the waste material and eventually work its way to the groundwater. So the removal of this gas and methane with the active flare it could even improve some of our test numbers at some of the groundwater wells in the location in that immediate area. Next slide, please. Now, the second big project that we're going to be undertaking is this groundwater remedy. We've had some numbers that need to be addressed, particularly around this well AMW12 and 12R. And you'll see on this diagram, those in the upper right part of this slide, those wells are located right on the property boundary at the northeastern part of the landfill. So we want to undertake this project. We're going to run a pilot test to address some concerns that we have with some of the test numbers we've gotten on those wells. We're going to, because of these test numbers that we've seen in recent testing, we're going to basically implement an active treatment system for this groundwater, and that's what the purpose of this pilot test is. We've evaluated some different remedial options to address this problem, and this one that we've selected is a potassium permanganate treatment system, which it's essentially a chemical oxidation process which converts some of these harmful components that are the result of any landfill. It's not just unique to this one. It's any landfill that has waste placement over time creates these chemical constituents that need to be contained within the property. So this potassium permanganate treatment system that we're looking to use will oxidize those components into less harmful inert materials. Next slide, please. So we're going to perform a pilot test to determine the treatment effectiveness of this system. So this is a schematic that shows these deployment wells. Those are some wells that will be installed up gradient of these, the well AMW 12 and 12R, which have groundwater test numbers that are of concern. We're going to go just up gradient or uphill from those wells, install these deployment wells, which will be used to install the potassium permanganate treatment material that will react with the groundwater and remove those constituents. It's essentially a chemical destruction of the volatiles in the groundwater using the potassium permanganate system. We will be doing some testing. Atlantic Coast Consulting will be doing some groundwater well testing of those wells before we deploy the product, and a number of testings will be done afterwards to determine the treatment effectiveness of that, to see how much is it really affecting these numbers at the wells. We feel real confident that we'll get some benefit from this. Next slide, please. So some of the outcomes of this pilot test that we want to run, the SOCOR material is essentially the potassium permanganate. That's an acronym for it's an acronym for a chemical treatment system that involves the potassium permanganate. So one of the benefits of this is we will reduce these groundwater volatiles to levels below the protection standards, which will help us to maintain compliance and contain any remaining chemical constituents within the permitted boundary. That's our hope. And we feel very positive about this, because this technology's been used in other locations with really good effectiveness and results. It's a much more cost-effective approach than some of the other remedial options that we had considered. And if it proves to be as effective as we hope it will be, it could be used to treat other areas of the landfill if needed in the future. Next slide, please. So our next steps are to drill a new well, MM11R, at the northern property boundary for measuring the methane. Go ahead and install the solar-powered vent and flare at that vent trench number 1. And then for the groundwater pilot test, we're already in the process of obtaining the EPD underground injection control permit. That's required anytime you deploy any kind of a solid or liquid material underground that can interact with the groundwater. You have to have an injection control permit. So we're in the process of doing that. We will install have the wells drilled up gradient of AMW 12 and 12R for deployment of the potassium permanganate product. Conduct the performance testing before and after we deploy that product, and then determine the effectiveness of that based on that testing. So, and that concludes the slides that we have. So if anyone has any questions, we'll be glad to try to answer those.
Yes, if you have any questions, please use the raise hand option, which is at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and we'll unmute you. Mr. Buckles, I'm not seeing that anyone has a question or has their hand raised right now.
Thank you.
Sam, can you give out your email address in case people have questions later that they could email you?
Yes, it is sbbuckles@forsythco.com. Again, that's sbbuckles@forsythco.com. co.com. And I'll be glad to follow up with you and answer any questions that you might have. And if I don't know the answer, I'll consult with someone that knows the answer and get back with you.
And Karen,
We've also
you're recording this. Where could they
Yes,
find
ma'am.
this?
We're recording, and we will put a link to it on the Environmental Services page on the county's website, and we'll publish that information via Facebook. Once we get the link down, we'll let everyone know where it will live. And we are recording this for those who could not make it this evening.
Thank you.
I believe that's going to conclude our webinar this evening. Thank you to those who joined us. Thank you to our presenters and panelists. And as mentioned, we will have this available on the county's website in the next couple of days, and we'll also post the link to it on the county's Facebook page. Thank you all, and have a good evening.
Thank you.